Examine the significance of Sue and Chris setting up as a private limited company.
Examine means to analyse or say why the points are important. In other words, this question is asking you to give reasons on why setting up as a private limited company is important for ethical food. Again, let's do a bit of planning. This time, a spider diagram may be helpful reviewing the features of a limited company. Rather like this one. So let's look at number 1 first. The shareholders of Ethical Foods Limited are Sue and Chris, who have a 50% shareholding each. Next, 2. Sue and Chris, as shareholders and owners of Ethical Foods, have limited liability, which means they are only liable for their investment in shares of £10,000. But they are not responsible for all the debts of the business, as they would be if they set up as a partnership. Therefore, their personal assets are protected and don't have to be sold if the business fails. At 3, we can see that because shares can only be bought and sold privately, this means Ethical Foods Limited may be protected from a takeover. Disadvantage here is that it'll limit the amount of capital that can be raised. Public limited companies, or PLCs, can raise a lot more capital because they can sell shares to the public. 4 shows us there are a lot of legal requirements when setting up PLC companies, which means costs are reduced when setting up Ethical Foods Limited rather than a PLC. Next, have a look at 5. Although financial information has to be published for the Registrar of Companies, the information doesn't need to be made public as with a PLC. This means financial affairs can be kept private. Lastly, 6. Since private limited companies are usually small concerns, the shareholders and the people controlling and running the firm are usually the same. This means that Chris and Sue would own and run Ethical Foods Limited. With public limited companies, there may be a divorce between ownership and control. What this means is that the people who run the firm are appointed by the shareholders who own the firm, and sometimes there may be disagreements. For example, some of the fans who are shareholders of Manchester United criticised the board who decided to accept the takeover of Malcolm Glazer. They feared that the company may be forced to take on too much debt, and this might ruin their ability to be successful in the Premiership. This is a good example of a divorce of ownership and control. Remember, an 8-mark question requires you to take 8 minutes over it. Here's a really good answer. A private limited company is a form of business organisation which has shareholders who have limited liability. This is probably the most significant feature of a limited company, because it means that Chris and Sue are only liable for the £10,000 they invested in shares. So, if their expansion plans don't turn out the way they expected, this is the total amount they will lose. This is significant because Chris and Sue won't have to sell their personal assets if their business doesn't do so well, which they would have to do if they were in a partnership. Other significant factors of setting up a limited company is that Chris and Sue can keep their financial affairs private, which may be important if their business idea of fair trade and organic products proves very profitable. This is because other firms will find it difficult to take over because it's not quoted on the stock exchange. This means shares can only be bought and sold privately. A disadvantage of this to Chris and Sue is that less finance can be raised and this might restrict their expansion plans in the future, or mean an over-reliance on bank loans, as they have already borrowed £10,000. So now our examiner's comments. That was an excellent answer, because it defined terms at the beginning. It also applied the answer effectively to the case study, as the answer mentions the £10,000 shares, the expansion plans and the bank loan. The two-paragraph style is effective, as is the fact that the word significance from the question is repeated as significant in the answer. This is an excellent exam technique.